Welcome back. If you remember, we were discussing the concept of the fractional reserve banking system. The idea that an individual bank can loan out only what it has in excess reserves, but there is an overall impact on the money supply as money and loans begin to ripple their way through the entire banking system. Quick review. Person A is referred to as a depositor. They have exchanged their labor for what is referred to as money. In this case, it's going to be $100. They then, in theory, deposit their money in the bank, and they receive in return a deposit slip that says they have ownership of $100. This is $100. Now, technically, they do not use this. They probably use a debit card. But in theory, for example, you guys have checks. And a check represents money as long as somebody accepts it. But along comes person B. Person B does not have enough money to buy a wakeboard boat. And who wouldn't want a good wakeboard boat? So they go to the bank, talk to a loan officer, and acquire a loan. A loan is simply a service that a bank provides. And they walk out. What do they walk out with? Well, they walk out with what is called a loan. And this loan represents a contract that says that person B will be given a certain amount of money, and in exchange, they will pay back that money, known as a principal, plus the cost of acquiring that money over a specified period of time, and that is what is called the interest. How much money, once again, did this person walk in with? Well, it was $100. This person at most, at this point, at this bank, can only get an $80 loan. And today we're going to take a look at where does the number 80 come from. A bigger picture from last lesson is that the fractional reserve banking system, we're talking in this case about the United States of America, but our model applies to any country or nation with a particular fractional reserve banking system. We have these type of people called depositors. And remember from a bank's balance sheet that the deposit by a particular person is referred to as a liability to the bank. That vocabulary is very important from previous lessons. Same time, we have other people who are taking out loans. And please remember from that balance sheet that a loan is considered an asset to the bank. This is money, and this is money. From an economic theoretical point of view, we would like to study, well, what is really going on? Well, what is clearly going on is that there was $100, now there's $80, and now there is $180. What does this number represent with respect to the United States of America? Well, in this case, this represents the total money supply in the overall, in this case, two-person economy. The fractional reserve banking system. And my main point of emphasis in the previous class was this idea of the money supply, where the money supply is extremely important. And we studied the role and purpose of money. And while in any free society based on private property, the idea of money will definitely show up. And our main concern was, how did $100 poof become $180? Well, if all the money was entirely backed by, let's say, a commodity like gold, at this point there would have been $100 worth of gold circulating the economy. Somebody discovered a mine, and now there's $180 worth of gold. But not only has the money supply increased, but what the money represents, which is called gold itself, has increased. And if you really studied history, you'd understand there's been bits of history, the age of exploration, where, of course, those quote-unquote explorers went out to discover riches. In reality, all the gold they brought back was really having an impact on the money supply. Who was this? And this is what I want to make sure you do understand. There is nobody that is doing this directly. It is an indirect result of the fractional reserve banking system. where all of these individual banks are accepting deposits and creating loans. And those loans, which equal dollars, are rippling their way through the economy. So let's take a closer look at that today. If you remember, we described what is called a reserve ratio. And a reserve ratio by law is the percentage of checkable deposits that a bank must keep on hand in its vault or at its local Federal Reserve in its particular district. For the state of Colorado, as I've mentioned before, it is called Kansas City. If hypothetically we say there's a 20% reserve ratio, that means for every dollar that's deposited, the bank must keep 20 cents. The remaining amount, they can do whatever they would like with. Now, if the remaining amount represents 80%, and we say hypothetically that all of it will be used to lend, to give out a loan, that means there's an 80% lending ratio. 20% they must keep, 80% they can loan out, and 80% plus 20%, of course, equals all the money. So let's go through our scenario again, but let's expand upon it. Person A deposits $100 in Bank A. Okay. Bank A can now loan out $80 to person B. If you remember from our previous slides, $80 was the amount of the loan. Now, how did I get that? Well, that's the purpose of mathematics. What is 80% of a single number? Of course, now many of you realize why I chose that initial number to be 100. It's just easier. Well, that's just mathematics. What is an unknown. I'm going to call that L sub 1. 80% expresses a real number, would be 80 hundredths. And of means multiplication. And we're always talking about the amount of checkable deposits. So in this case, person A deposited $100. The reserve ratio is 20%, which means the lending ratio is 80%. Therefore, the amount of loan that a bank can loan out is found by multiplication. 100 times 0.80, or more importantly, 100 times 80 hundredths is simply $80. The question is, what does person B do? Why would you take out a loan? Well, of course, it's to buy something. And that's what person B does. They are active in the economy. Person B decides to hypothetically buy a car for $80 from person C. So loans are beginning to work their way through the economy. Then, of course, what does person C do? Well, hypothetically, person C has a lot of options. They could put their money under their pillow. They could maybe go directly spend their money. But in most cases, people being very consistent and habitual and predictive are probably going to deposit in a bank, their bank. So that's what person C does. Person C takes the money they've earned from a transaction and places it in Bank C. Remember, ceteris paribus, this is a voluntary transaction. It is a win for person B. It is a win for person A. It's a win for person A, person C, person B, person A. Everybody is doing better in this economy. Ceteris paribus, of course. But now I'm all the way back to the beginning. So what does Bank C do? Well, in this case, Bank C takes 20% of the $80 and puts it aside as required reserves, and whatever's left over is called excess reserves, and they can loan out as much as it has in excess reserves. One more time. A single bank can loan out as much as it wants up to the exact value of excess reserves. How did we get 64? Well, once again, we're back to here. So in this case, this particular loan, I'll call L sub 2. There's the lending ratio, which is dictated by the reserve ratio, the times the checkable deposit. In this case, this is person C, who deposited $80 in their particular bank. So notice I'm now working through a single bank into multiple banks in the banking system. Well, why would we stop? Because what does person D do? And I think you guys are beginning to recognize the pattern that's going on. So just because I took the time to write this, I'm starting to see a pattern also. Person D to person E to bank E to person F to person G to bank G to person H to person I to I think I'm starting to tire out here, but you do recognize there's a lot of people out there And there's a lot of banks. And all that happens is this keeps occurring and occurring and occurring. Notice the numbers are getting gradually smaller. That is because I keep multiplying by a value that is less than 1. And if I was to sum all that up, it would be close to $500. Now, you should have no idea how I came up with this number, but we're going to figure it out. A 20% reserve ratio means an 80% lending ratio. Notice person A deposits, that's the key thing, this $100. That allows bank A to loan out $80 to somebody who deposits in their bank B, who then once again has to keep some and then can loan out 64. And it keeps rippling its way through, and I did all the numbers for you, rounding to the nearest penny. And what I notice, it's a shame I can't get rid of this, is that, oh, it's all fixed. There's a value down here. It's $11 and I believe 25 cents. You cannot see it. I apologize for that. That is a purpose of calculus. Calculus allows me to find the sum of an infinite series that begins to approach a limit. Once again, calculus can be useful. But the point is this. The initial person had just $100. All of this represents loans. Key bullet from the previous day. Loans are money. This represents new monies that are starting to show up. How much loans are there? Without you figuring it out, but you should be able to total those numbers, it comes to be $400. This is how much money was deposited. This is how much loans are being created. This together represents the entire money supply, which is $500. Loans are creating money. Let's expand upon that a little more. So, person A's are going to the bank. Person B's are going to the bank. Person A is depositing money. There's all the money they are depositing. They're getting ownership slips that say they have money. And I remind you, person A literally does have money. But person B, who's going to the bank with nothing, is walking out with all this money. And they have a loan that says it is money. And it is money because someone's taking their checks and saying, yeah, that's total money. So what we can see is that the process of loans is just doing this to the overall economy. Now, I know what you're thinking, which is what I would be thinking too. Oh, awesome. More people are getting money, and more people are getting money, and more people are getting money. More people are getting money, but what does the money represent? Well, in this case, person A, the money represents actual money. For person B, it's poof, money coming out somewhere, nowhere. So these are all loans. I also want to state for the record, every time person B pays off a loan, well, that works the opposite direction. So money is being destroyed. So what I see is money and loans that are being given out. I see loans that are being paid off. And the process just keeps doing this. There is now more money floating out in the overall economy. The old you would have said, yay, more money means great. Well, I don't know. Is more money better? What happens when the money supply increases? Here we go. Point of today. Inflation. Many of you have given me a definition of inflation which says, oh, the prices of all goods and services are going up. You remember from microeconomics that for a single good or service, there could be an increase in price if there is either an increase in demand or there is a decrease in supply, ceteris paribus. But now what I see is simply more and more and more of these things called dollars floating out there. And as a result, the money, I'm going to drive this home to you guys. the money supply itself is really increasing. So maybe we should rethink our definition of inflation as opposed to saying it's all prices going up. Rather, all prices are going up because the money supply is increasing. Make sure you understand that. We've talked about the difference between the nominal value of a dollar versus the real value of the dollar. Back to here. Mr. Wynn, everybody's much more wealthy as a process. See all this money they have? No, you're forgetting what we talked about wealth is. If before I made $1 million a year and one hamburger cost me $1 million, in theory, the only wealth I have is one hamburger. But now I'm making $10 million a year. But the price of the hamburger has gone up to $10 million. How many hamburgers can I buy? That's wealth. And the answer is still just one. My wealth has not increased. My income has increased. But it's not how much income I have that matters. It is the prices of the respective goods and services that matter. And in this particular case, ceteris paribus, the prices of those overall goods and services are going up simply because there is more and more money floating out there. Common myth, we can eliminate poverty by getting everybody more money. It all depends on what the money represents. You guys have a great day, and we're going to expand upon this even further in the future.